Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host Greg Tompsett along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, how we doing?
I'm doing, man. I feel like when my mom used to drag me to stuff I didn't totally want to do. I feel like these episodes, these cap episodes, feel like that. Like I had to do real homework on stuff that I don't follow. I lean on you whenever I have a cap question. You're like my Google, and I just message you and I say, hey, what is it going to cost us to do this? What's it going to cost? And then you do it. So, but you made me do some homework today, so I'm a little annoyed, but I'm all right.
Good. I'm comfortable with that. I'm okay with that mix. I think that's a fair, healthy mix in our relationships. I think that makes sense. It's kind of fun. We talked pre-show that there's only so many variations. The cap is math, so there's only so many things you can choose to do with these combinations. But we're going to talk through it tonight. We're going to be able to have some fun and explain how we would handle some of the toughest decisions in, these different areas that you go through, and how we're going to figure out where each of these pieces are going to fit. And, nowadays when the kids are ready to make a tough decision, they play themselves a game of F, marry, kill. And, for us, F means financially responsible decisions that are mutually consensual in every way. So we're going to go through this, and we're going to kind of go back and forth that each of the players that are currently under contract, these are guys who are on the Bills roster, not free agents, not other pieces from that way, guys who are under contract that you're hearing many people talk about wanting to be released or extended or all the different things. And we're going to force each other to make a call of either the F being the financial restructuring, meaning a pay cut or kicking some money down the road. Marry, meaning extend or give a pay raise but reduce the cap in the short term, or kill, meaning release outright and remove whether you have a pre or post June 1st cut. But we'll try to stick to those rules, stick within there. Some of those we could even say we don't expect this to happen. It probably won't happen, but if we had to choose one, it would be this. And we'll go down through there. And we went through pretty much the top 15, 16 guys on the roster, the highest paid people on the team. And we'll go through each one and try to figure out where we think it's going to fall.
Yep.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Who wants to?
I'll lead it off. I'll ask you first. We'll start with ease into a nice easy one that shouldn't be too complicated. I don't think people are clamoring for this name to get cut. Aaron, what would you do with Tre'Davious White?
I trade him. No. I honestly, my first instinct is nothing. There's money that can be saved if you do a restructure. If there's going to be one restructure that I don't care about because they're going to be here no matter what, is Tre'Davious White, and when we get to him, Deion Dawkins later on. Those are the two guys that are going to be here no matter what. So if you kick some guaranteed money down the road or harder dead cap money down the road, like we're seeing with the Star Lotulelei contract that you talked to me about earlier, these are guys I know are going to be in Buffalo throughout hopefully their contract. So he's one that if he's happy to take a restructure and get a little bit of a bonus and help the cap out a little bit for the team, I'm happy to do that because I know he's going to be here. But I'm fine if he wants to sit on his cap pay. He's earned that number. So if he can get more in a bonus, then great. Yeah, he's earned that too. But I'm happy to just F him. I'm happy to
So just to kind of explain, the way that Aaron's talking about this, Trey has a cap hit this year of $14 million. Obviously, he has a crazy dead cap that if we were to release him, it would cost us $33 million. That's not even remotely possible. What a restructure would mean is part of that $14 million cap hit is $10.4 million of it is a base salary. That's just a salary for this year. You could knock that down basically to $1 million and take the $9.5 million and stretch it out over the next 5 years, sprinkling $2 million in each year. You would take his cap hit this year from $14 million down to about $7 million. So honestly, a player like Trey White is when you want to do that, because he's not a guy you're going to release over the life of this contract. He's going to be here for that whole stretch. So where you kick that can down the road doesn't really make that big of a difference. And if next year's cap hit is $14.6 million or $16 million, it's not really a huge difference in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
So that, that'll be a theme as we move along here. Some of the contracts that you look to restructure aren't the guys who are borderline ready to get released. It's actually the guys who you're sure you want to keep that you want to restructure. So I wouldn't be shocked if he helps the team out here. I agree. It's maybe not your first option since you just signed that extension, a couple months ago. But I wouldn't be upset to see it.
Some of that, though, is putting the news out there, right? Like some of that is for Trey's ego of the contract that he signed. Now that contract signed, he's locked in. He's probably going to be happy to do an extension if they approach him and say, "Hey, Trey," because when you do start to look at some of the restructure savings, it's one of the bigger savings at 7.5 is what SpotTrack said on their estimation of a restructure. So I'll go by that number. It's one of the bigger ones. And he can get that money up front that he was going to be. He's not going to lose out in the deal.
Yeah. Any restructure so be careful with this. Agents like to use the word restructure when their clients get a pay cut. So you'll hear it tweeted that, Tyler Croft agreed to a restructured contract. No, he didn't. He got a pay cut. A true restructure is when you're just shuffling money around. For these guys like a Trey White, all it is saying,
superstars.
Hey, instead of getting $1 million a game in a game check during the season, can we just cut you a check for $9 million right now? Would you mind that? It's almost never a negative thing in true restructures for the player.
Absolutely. So yeah, I would like to F Trey.
I like it. All right, I'm ready for my first one.
All right, let's go. Stephon Diggs. What are you going to do with him?
I'm going to marry Stephon Diggs. And the reason I'm going to do that is something I hinted at in a show with our friend Anthony Prohaska on the Disguise Coverage podcast. Make sure you guys are checking him out. He deserves a pay raise. I do think some people overplay it. When he signed his 5-year, $72 million deal, that's a really good contract. He signed for plenty of money. He's not underpaid. Now you're seeing DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, all those guys get $20 million a year. That's kind of the going rate for high-end receivers. He just led the NFL in every receiving category. What you can do is give his agent the opportunity to wave the flag of, hey, look, we got $40 million in new money and a 2-year, $40 million extension that really is signing him to that extension at the end of his existing deal. You're spreading some of that out. The same way we just talked about it with Trey, you're going to take his salary cap and his salary for this season, convert that into a signing bonus, let them announce it as a 2-year, $40 million extension at $20 million a year that you're adding on when he's 31 and 32. He's a player that looks like he's going to age perfectly nicely. And all of a sudden you take this year's cap hit from $12.5 million, and all of a sudden you knock that down to almost $3 or $4 million. Maybe you even give him a little extra in the signing bonus so that way he gets some of that $40 million in the future now. You can still knock that down by like $5 or $6 million and give him the reward that he's earned without blowing up this year's cap and making all the future numbers still very palatable and in the maybe $16 to $17 million range, which is still very doable for him. So I will very excitedly marry Stephon Diggs.
I can't wait. He's so crucial to this team that he's another one of those guys in the sense that a restructure doesn't really work necessarily in the sense like we were talking with Trey. It's more like what you were saying, but it's the same kind of philosophy of this is a guy that you want to be here, so let's figure out pushing some money down there. The Super Bowl window's relying on Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen growing together in that number one wide receiver quarterback role. So I agree 100%. Let's both marry him. Let's have like a little polygamist.
Yeah, go to Utah. All kinds of fun, exciting things.
Absolutely.
All right, let's switch back to maybe a slightly different kind of decision. Aaron, what would you do with Vernon Butler?
Kill him. This is the easiest one you send me. You save the $6.8 million to kill him. I like Vernon Butler. I actually think he came on a little bit towards the end of the year. He did some nice stuff. I think he was unfortunately a product of the slow start, a lot of the changing parts along the defense. He had to play out of position with Starr not here. It just wasn't a good fit for him playing out of position most of the year. He came on at the end, didn't do enough to earn the 7.8 cap hit next year, and they just save too much without him. I think that they can replace his production with a healthy Harrison Phillips. Justin Zimmer, I think, can come in and do what he did. So this was the easiest one of the night. Sorry, Vernon Butler. Thanks for everything. Good luck. This might be a guy, though, that they're able to bring. I don't think Vernon Butler is going to go out in free agency and get any kind of massive deal. I think they could let the dust settle, and he might be a guy that comes back if they don't fit. I don't think he's going to sign on quick anywhere. I think he'll be available when the dust settles in free agency. So there might be an opportunity to bring him back at a smaller cap hit if they feel they need that depth, but you got to get rid of him now.
Yeah, I think it was really smart the way you described it as the easiest one. I think out of all the names that you hear people throw around in, hey, release this guy, release that guy, and you see people do these projections where they release like 9 players. The only one to me that's easy is Vernon Butler. I think that Star Lotulelei is a 1-for-1 replacement for him. He's coming back off of the COVID opt-outs. That $6.8 million is just too easy to save. It's only a $1.5 million dead cap. It's a super easy one, or $1 million actually. So I think you're spot on. That's very accurate. Unfortunately for Mr. Butler, we will kill him in our game. All right, I'm ready for my next one.
So another one that gets tossed around quite a bit in the same kind of conversation here, we got Quentin Jefferson. What are you going to do with the vet this year?
So Quentin Jefferson, I think if you look at all the different items that we look at, the one that I think Eric is most passionate about is Quentin Jefferson. So $8 million cap hit, $1.5 million dead cap. I don't think it's out of the possibility that he just gets outright released. I think he's safer than people think. He, for me, would be a F in the restructure pay cut sense. I think they find a way to rework this. I think they talk to his agent and say, hey, you're not going to get $8 million out in this market. How about we bring you back at a slightly more reasonable number, maybe closer to $5 million. Give us like $3 million of it back. We'll build it into some incentives that if you play out of your mind, you can get that back. There's another little trick that people will look at. If you restructure it that way and make it in unlikely to be earned incentives, so likely to be earned and unlikely to be earned, the only difference between those is, did he do that in the previous year? So if you put it in of 1 sack more than what he had, or a couple percentage points more snaps played than what he played, it's called unlikely to be earned. And that means that they don't decide it until the end of the season, and it doesn't count until next year's cap. It doesn't count during this year. So that's a number that we can see where they can kind of play with it to get under the cap, make it make work, but give him the chance to re-earn that money to be able to go into it. Our friend Ron out here saying also extend. That is a possibility for him as well. They could say, hey, we want to bring you back, add on 1 more year, but we think it's more like 2 years and $5 million, or 2 years and $10 million at $4 or $5 million a year, not the $8 million number for this year. So for me, I actually think it's higher than people think to bring him back, but I think that it would be at a lower number. So I'm going to do F in the sense of a pay cut to keep him, with the potential that it's a Mary in a team-friendly extension. But I think most likely he's back, but at a lower number.
Yeah, I listened to obviously, I think probably all of Bills Mafia listened to the Brandon Bean on Chris Collinsworth PFF podcast. And
great pod.
Yeah, some things really stood out to me. One, when he was talking about the salary cap this year and the limits in free agency, and talking, some of the guys that maybe moving it to bonuses and them being able to make up some of the money, moving their deal around where they can make it up in some bonuses, or like you said, maybe an extension, but maybe it's not really an extension. Maybe they're just moving the money around and know that he's not going to be here in that final year. They can keep the dead money down, or different types of things. It reminded me of a guy like a Quentin Jefferson, where you get a little bit creative to try to keep this guy and limit that number. Like you said, I don't know that they're going to go out and replace him. And I think that what they brought him in for requires what they were going into the season with, which was Star Lotulelei, Ed Oliver, where he's supposed to be, bringing in another defensive end and allowing him to be that rotational defensive lineman that they wanted him to be. I think he can do that. I think he's worth it with a little bit less of a cap hit. I agree. Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes, and I think that I reference all the time. I think Ed Oliver played out of position more than any other player on the Bills roster. A close number 2 is probably Quentin Jefferson.
Right.
At no point did he plan on playing one tech. Now you can maybe let him do what he was intended to do, see if he can earn that money back in some incentives. But if not, we have a better deal. And I will say it's not impossible that he gets released.
Sure. I don't think it's as likely as people just throwing out, cut this guy. I think Brandon Beane was honest when he said a lot of the guys that they had, they would like to find ways to bring back. I don't think he was just, that's not lip service. I think he's been pretty honest about where Milano seems to stand, and maybe even Darrell Williams, he was pretty honest. But the rest of the guys, he's kind of said, well, there might be some guys that we can rework things and get them back.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to look at it. Moving into our next player, one that I don't think is brought up a lot, but maybe deserves some creativity, is the soon-to-be 32-year-old Cole Beasley. He is a $7.3 million cap hit this year with 2 years left, this year and next year. I don't hear a lot of people talk about him, but I included him here because there are some possibilities.
Yeah, so one thing about Cole Beasley, he's 32. He's not a young 32. He's not a highly used 32. He didn't come to the Bills with a lot of wear and tear on those tires. The injury, obviously, it wasn't weight bearing, so I don't see probably any long-term lingering issues from that injury. I think he's got a couple years left. I think he can finish that deal. From SpotTrack's analysis of Restructure, you would save $1.8 million in savings this year. So his 7.8 cap hit, you would save the 1.8. That's not nothing. That can go towards that investment in a quarterback too. Some of the guys you were talking about on that podcast with Eric, getting a guy like that for a couple of years. So I'm gonna again Cole Beasley for the sake of this exercise. I think if you can trim that money and keep him here, I think he's a guy that will stay here for the next 2 years. I'm happy to keep him. I don't see a replacement on this roster for the type of slot that he is. I'm hoping that maybe they can find a guy late in this draft that he can tutor into that role, but we're probably 2 years away from replacing him at the least.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the right path. The first question Brandon Beane, Joe Shane, Dan Morgan asked themselves of should we restructure this contract is, do we anticipate them completing the years currently under contract? Right. I think Cole Beasley is the easiest one. It's not necessarily a Stephon Diggs scenario where it's, we feel confident we want to extend him. My extension proposal for Diggs was to bring him to the age that Cole Beasley is going to be in his 2 years. He's actually 32 and 33. I was only extending Diggs to 31 and 32. I don't think we're ready to all of a sudden decide, do we want to pay Cole Beasley in an age 34 season? That can come when that time comes.
Sure.
But
after we win the Lombardi.
There you go. Lots of money to throw around after we win the Super Bowl. Do we think he's a guy who's going to be here this year and next year? Yes. Do I have any concern with kicking that can down the road to give us a little bit extra space? I think that's a perfect way to approach it.
Yeah. And it's a careful game they have to play, because if the window gets weird here, kicking some of that money down the road and being locked into too many guys doesn't give you the ability to get out of this. Yeah. It tightens up that ability to be flexible, like people will say on Twitter, of like, you can just move money around, you can restructure all these things. That starts to compound, and then in 2 to 3 years you have all these other contracts that are going to come up that aren't going to be friendly to cut. You're going to go through swallowing a lot of medicine again to get through that. Luckily, having a quarterback makes swallowing medicine a little bit easier when you have to, but it's just something I think, when fans are playing with these spot tracks and stuff, it's easy to go through and just restructure every single deal and cut all these guys. At some point that compounds and you're back up against another wall.
Well, and I'm going to do that here tonight. I'm tracking each of the moves that we make as we go, and I'll kind of explain. We're going to be screwed into. Yeah, correct. I'm going to explain how much we've screwed 2022 and 2023 after we make all these moves. Yeah. All right, I'm ready for the next one.
All right, so let's go over to Mario Addison. So this isn't kind of in that same group with Vernon Butler, Quentin Jefferson. Mario Addison is another one that gets brought up. I think we're going to share the same thoughts on this too.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because his contract was structured to keep him here for 2 of the 3 years when he signed. There wasn't an easy out. It's a $4 million dead cap hit, but the cap hit's 10.1. So the savings of $6.1 million isn't nothing. That is somewhat of a possibility. He's one of the few guys that are there where the June 1st thing comes into play. If you were to cut him and to designate it as a post-June 1st cut, you can share that $4 million dead cap hit, half this year and half next year, and actually get $8.1 million in savings. So there are some possibilities there. I also think he played better than people realize. Like, no, I don't know that it was $10 million worth of value, but I think he was maybe a little better than people realize. I have him as an F in the restructure sense for now. I will say he's one that would be a 1-for-1 replacement if they made a move at pass rusher. Like, obviously everyone talks about J.J. Watt. If J.J. Watt gets brought in, Mario Addison would be released, I think, immediately corresponding to that move. I don't think they just release Mario Addison to say that, hey, well, I guess we got to draft a guy now. I think unless they sign another guy, I don't anticipate him being off the team. So I'm going to guess that we don't get a J.J. Watt or Carl Lawson or Romeo Okwara or Yannick Ngakoue level pass rusher, and that we keep Mario Addison, but maybe do shuffle his money around. The one caveat to that is, if we restructure this year, you're kicking that can to next year. You're making it harder to cut him next year, when next year we could do it pretty pain-free. So that's one reason that you may, if you decide to keep him, you may just hold the line and say, you want to know what? We're just going to take our medicine and pay him and make it easy to get out of it next year if we don't have that replacement pass rusher to bring in.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Star next when I come to talk to you, but it's sort of the same. You're kicking that can down the road to where even next, and then if you have to start trimming fat next year, he's kind of a stalemate, right? Like, you're just kind of stuck at that guy. You're not going to restructure him again. So that's going to be a really difficult one for this is a guy that I've been hemming and hawing and kind of going back and forth. Originally, I was on team just easy, let's cut him. Dead cap doesn't kill me if it's not a lot of guys get at the same time that you're dealing with. I think you can swallow a few million here and there every year. I think that's okay to have some dead cap hanging out. Like you said, I didn't know until just now that you could split it up. So that's cool too. If you don't want to swallow it all at once, you can get a little finance plan from
there. Well, I mean, a quick clarification for that. Steve's asking a good question here. What good is $8 million after June 1st? So there's a give and a take when you so the NFL, you used to literally have to wait until June 1st, and everybody would wait until June 1st and say, okay, who's going to get cut now? Well, the NFL, the Players Association said, hey, come on, that's not necessary. Don't make our guys wait to sign with somebody else. Let the teams designate them as a post June 1st cut and just do it now to get rid of them. Well, the trade-off to that is the NFL said, okay, but if you pre-designate it and release Mario Addison now as a post-June 1st cut, you don't get that $8.2 million in cap space until June 1st. Right. So if they let's use J.J. Watt as the example. If they wanted to use Mario Addison's cap space to create the room to sign J.J. Watt, they couldn't do it as a post-June 1st cap cut because they wouldn't get that cap space until then. He would stay technically on the roster until May 30th. So it's a weird balance of how you do that. I don't anticipate him being a post-June 1st cut because the only way I see him being released is if we replace him with a pass rusher. If we replace him with a pass rusher, we need the cap space now to sign him. So I either think he's a just straight-out release and we eat the $4 million in dead cap and it is what it is, or he stays on the team and we don't restructure him so that we can get out of the contract next year. I kind of think it's all or nothing with him.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, Again, my biggest complaint with the people that are just kind of, cut this guy and that guy is you're creating holes, right? Are we ready? I was happy with Epenesa's flashes towards the end of the year. I think he started to really... I'm
optimistic for next year. I'm not certain.
I was super optimistic about Ed Oliver after his first year. And I think he had a fine year, but obviously playing out of position, he wasn't able to dominate. I'm not ready to just throw Epenesa into starting defensive end without really depth there. And we don't know what you're going to do in the draft, but unless you get Watt or some other vet like that shakes free from a roster between now and then, I agree to keep. I don't know where you get better anywhere else. That's going to make that much of a difference in the cap hit this year.
Yeah, correct. I think that's the right way to do it. So he's one of the toughest ones, and I kind of think it's all or nothing. And right now, I'm going to say nothing.
Yeah.
Is my guess, and I think we'll know before the league year starts. Because if the easiest and most logical replacement would be that the Bills reach a deal with J.J. Watt, and if it is, it'll be cutting. You already said Butler, and I think Addison would be listed to that.
Yeah. All right. Give me one.
So another one that's probably a bit of a layup here. Lee Smith.
Yep. It's a layup in the sense that this makes perfect sense for him to just get cut or retire. I think
they would give him the courtesy of announcing it as a retirement, but fortunately for him, the release doesn't count.
I do also think that they like Lee Smith more than the fan base does, even in the sense like if there's maybe I don't know that it's a blind spot, but if there is like a blind spot for McDermott and Bean, it's leadership and guys like Lee Smith.
Locker room toughness.
Yes. And they'll utilize him. They do utilize, like he has a role on this team. It's not as much as fans want it to be for a roster spot. It's not as dynamic as fans want it to be for a roster spot, but I think they like him more than the fan base does. But I do also think they're realists in that he's getting older. He's probably leaning towards retirement. If this wasn't a weird cap space year, I think it would be much more likely that Lee Smith actually comes on back. But he might be one of those guys where they say, hey, look, we would have liked to have kept you. We're probably going to release you. Do you want to bow out on your own terms before you just kind of fade away? So I think he's a catch and release kill for the beat.
So a very, humane, gentle kill.
Yes.
But yeah, I agree. And I would certainly see them positioning that and letting him go that route. And I will say, people joking here about the blocking tight end and things like that, that is a role that they care about. Yeah. That is a role that they will find a blocking tight end, some other veteran dude that'll come in, hopefully cheaper than what Lee Smith was. Because Lee Smith was, at the time, the best blocking tight end in the NFL. And for anybody who gives him a hard time here, Aaron and I joke about the PFF grades all the time, so I take this with a grain of salt. But once you get past Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Deion Dawkins, and Darrell Williams, Lee Smith was the 5th highest graded player on the Bills offense last year. So what he was asked to do, which is block, he's still really freaking good at. So it's not like he was a failure. I'll even go as far as to say we can't replace him. I don't believe that we will find another blocking tight end as good as what he was. Maybe we could find somebody who's better at the other tight end things than what he was. But just purely from a blocking standpoint, we likely won't replace him with a guy who's as good as he was in 2020 as a blocking tight end.
Yeah, and whether in free agency, we will also, and obviously in the draft, we're not going to replace the leadership council role. And I talk about it a lot on this show. It's cared about a lot more in that building than we want to give it credit for, when we're thinking about it as fans. That matters to them. That mattered to keep DeMarco around maybe longer than he should have. I think Lee Smith is a really dynamic leader. We've heard Josh Allen rave about the relationship that he has with Lee Smith. Lee Smith being the guy that when Josh was doing sugar high stuff or getting in his own head, Lee Smith's the guy that's right there to drag him out of it. Those things, when those stories get into the media, it's because it matters in this organization. And he's one of those guys. And you saw Lorenzo leave. Now you're going to see Lee Smith leave. Some of these younger guys are going to have to step up into those roles because you're seeing this kind of old leadership council as they get tied up against this cap. Those guys are going to have to go. That's not a guy you're bringing into the building unless JJ walks. You get that JJ Watt trade, you replace it there. I can't see it anywhere else. You're going to lose out on the leadership council. So that is something that matters to this team.
Yeah. Some of the other people asking about some of the other spots, a Kyle Juszczyk kind of guy coming in, or Reggie Gilliam. I think that they're more movable H-back, fullback players than replacing the Lee Smith was. I mean, people were joking here about he's basically an extra lineman. He literally was a lineman.
He's there wasn't 3/4 of a tackle.
There wasn't a ton of difference in a heavy set of bringing in a 6th offensive lineman or bringing in Lee Smith. We even joked about it the one game where people started to get hurt, and there was a weird stretch where
Nsekhe went down for
where Nsekhe went down. I wasn't joking. Lee Smith is the emergency tackle. He would play offensive tackle in the NFL and honestly be passable in that. Like, probably not be horrendous for if he needed to do it.
Probably
for
better than Cody Ford at tackle.
You're not wrong. All right, let's continue to move forward with the next guy on our list.
Yeah. So, a guy I love. Happy to have him back.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one. I had to text you about it because I wasn't really sure what was going on, but you had a good explanation. So I hope you did that to the people here. We're talking about Star Lotulelei coming back. What are you going to do with him, man?
So obviously, Star went from the most lampooned and mocked player on the team to, oh my God, I can't believe how much we need Star Lotulelei. What last year showed is how unrecognized and how kind of disregarded the one tech position is in the NFL, because you only notice it when you're missing it. And the guy whose job is, hey, keep Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds clean and don't let blockers get to them, is a really valuable role, especially when you don't have someone there to do it. So Star's coming back this year. He opted out. The combination of when Brandon Beane negotiated his restructure, so he was a restructure that was done last year to save some money and shuffle some things around. His had a little bit of a pay cut to it, but mainly restructure. They didn't plan on him opting out. They planned on having that last year, getting that out of the way, having the Mariners the one tech next to Ed Oliver, and then this year they probably would have had an out that they probably could have moved on if they wanted to from the contract. This year they can't. He has a $7.6 million cap hit with an $11.8 million dead cap. So if Star shows up and he's horribly out of shape, or decides he doesn't want to play football anymore, or they just wanted to release him, it costs $4.2 million more to release him than it does simply to keep him on the roster and have him play, or just pretend to be on the roster and not even play. That also comes into effect with the option that my initial instinct was, hey, why don't we restructure him? That's the easiest one. I'll F that and go through and just kick that can down the road. Well, if we do that, now you're guaranteeing he has to be on the roster not only next year, but probably 2023 as well. So you're probably signing up for all 3 years. Next year's already a $5.1 million dead cap hit. With a 9.3, so you're only saving 4.2 next year right now. If you restructure any of this, you're going to make next year into an $8 or $9 million dead cap hit where there'll be no savings by releasing him. So I although I'm tempted to want to get some of that money back, I kind of think this is closer to that Mario Addison situation where you just don't do anything. You take your medicine, you let him play this year and just pray that he's healthy and motivated and rejuvenated after a year off. And that, I guess technically, if I had to choose one, it would be F in the restructure mode. But realistically, I kind of think it's a do nothing, just ride it out.
Yeah, I agree. I think this one's a draw at this point, and that's okay. Jo says here hostage situation, and it does sound like a hostage situation, but this is a needed one. You have to get a guy to do his job. We saw this season, there's not a lot of those guys. A lot of them ended up opting out because of COVID. There's not a lot of these human beings that can eat space in the NFL and not be moved and take double teams and free up space. The Bills were probably trying to find one at the trade deadline. I think it's safe to assume that they were looking for that role. Teams aren't willing to get rid of these guys. So you're going to see a lot of the guys that maybe hit free agency, or you were hoping we're going to hit free agency, probably going to stay put. I think defensive tackle probably got the biggest boost from COVID in their value. I think league-wide of a lot of those guys not being around. And
we're about to see Landon Tomlinson sign for, probably 4 years, $40 million, $45 million.
I think it's great that Bills Mafia got a little taste, because it's a tough thing if you box score scout, or if you sort of just watch the broadcast and don't really dive into how it helps and listen to the players. He's a tough guy to evaluate, right? Like, that position's a tough one to evaluate. You don't see the production. You don't see any of this stuff. It's Joni Mitchell never lied. Most definitely right. Joni Mitchell's never lied, man. You don't know what you got till it's gone. The way we saw this defense suffer without him makes him totally fine at the value he's at. I'm sure once he comes back and he's not getting sacks and stuff, people will revert back to bitching about Star's contract. But I'm happy he's here on that contract, and I'm cool with it being a draw.
Yeah, I'm mad at Kevin for even putting this out into the universe. In theory, Star is eligible to opt out of the season again. If he does and he kicks everything back another year, it's going to be a disaster to have to
Yeah,
do, because one, then you'd still need to replace him. I will say, in the short term, him opting out would technically create $7.8 million in cap savings this year, that we would now have room to go sign somebody on a one-year deal. So it wouldn't be the end of the world there. But then you're talking about all of a sudden the years that you have to have him on the roster, instead of age 32 and 33, are now age 33 and 34. It's just getting harder each year to try to figure out a way to make that work. So we need him to come back. We need him to be motivated, in good shape, and ready to play good football at a one technique. Give us that 25, 30 snaps a game. That's all we need, and then we'll move on.
I think on that front, it's possible for sure. I'm not sure what his motives for opting out were. I'm not sure what his reasoning.
I think he has a very large family, and there were some high risk factors that were in play.
And that makes total sense. I'm not going to hit thoughts in his brain, but if I was a player that did opt out this year, and I hate to say I saw how good this Bills team was, I'm sure Starr was missing being on that run with this Bills team.
When they were so desperately looking for a one tech at the trade deadline, do you know how badly he wanted to take that back to come back and play?
Yes, that he had missed it at points. I'm sure he's fine with his decision. Yeah. I don't know that he makes the same decision twice, though. I think when you look back at how the Bills were able to handle the season internally, with some of the close contact stuff they had, with some of the tests, they had no outbreak. Things didn't spread at one Bills drive. I think they handled it right. I think if you are somebody that maybe has high-risk members in your family, the Bills maybe gave you some confidence that, hey, they did things right the whole way and never really had a problem. Things seem to be trending in the right direction for next season with COVID, knock on wood. I think it's likely we see Starr back next year. Everything lines up to him coming back.
A couple questions here in the chat asking about the Bills couldn't choose to have him opt out and then pay him anyways, but honestly how that would work would be, hey, we need you to come back and not opt out, and then all of a sudden in camp you're gonna have a back injury that we're gonna need to put you on the injured reserve for the whole year, and you get your money anyways, and we get the roster spot back. They would come, yes, that's a perfect example of it. They would come to a gentleman's agreement on an injured reserve settlement that would let them just take their medicine and move on, but get the roster spot back. They'd find a way to do that.
And I don't know, Starr. I don't think he's going to be the kind of guy that wants to hurt the team down the road later and get them in some weird financial situation. I think he has a good enough relationship with Bean and McDermott his whole career that he's not going to do anything specifically to hurt him. Now, one more question. I don't want to spend too much time on Starr here, but to your scenario, say he was to opt out or restructure or something like that, what happens to that contract if say after next year and the next 2 years he decides to retire and doesn't finish out? How does that hit the books? What goes on there? Because we saw some weird stuff with Eric Wood, right? When he retired, they had a wait, we can't do it yet type of thing. What happens?
So the reason that Eric Wood's the perfect example, and I didn't bring it up in the Lee Smith scenario, but technically it applies there as well. In the NFL Players Association CBA contract language, the word retire does not exist. There is no retire. Like, you don't get to just walk away and say, hey guys, don't worry about it. You guys keep that money. It's no big deal. Right. If you have prorated signing bonuses that have not been paid out, if you have guaranteed money that's still there, it's there. There's nothing you can do about it. Retire means release. So when I said that earlier about we only need to pray that Starr is ready to play and wants to play, him retiring is by far the worst case scenario right now, because then it accelerates the future cap hits and we would have to eat the $11.8 million this year, meaning we lose an extra $4.2 million on top of the $7.6 we owe him and not have him and have to go replace the one tech. So I also think, to your point, I don't think he does that. I think even if he was going to retire and genuinely decided, hey, coach, I ain't got it, man. Last year, here's the scenario. You see all the guys, Joe Thomas, you see him now, freaking 100 pounds less than what he was.
Can't keep the weight, right?
What if Starr really enjoyed not having to take in all the calories and the 2-a-day workouts and lost 40 pounds and now is walking around at 280 and isn't this huge, massive one-tech defensive tackle? And he's like, hey, coach, man, I don't have it in me to put that back on and carry it. Let me know what you need me to do so that I don't screw you guys over. But I just ain't got it. you would see them come up with some kind of injured reserve settlement deal that wouldn't screw the team over, but would really be his version of retirement. So I think that's a great way to phrase that.
Yep. Cool.
All right, man. We've made it halfway. We've got 4 more each. Here is probably the most talked about one. So I'm really interested to see what direction you take this. John Smoke Brown. We are talking about a player that has a $9.5 million cap hit, a $1.6 million dead cap, has been a wide receiver too. What are you doing with John Brown?
I'm going to extend John Brown. I'm going to cheapen it up this year. I'm going to extend him, and I'm going to marry him. I think cutting him saves $7.9 million, so it's not nothing. I understand why people look at that and they can come to that. I'm not there yet, and not wanting John Brown on this roster. I love Gabe Davis. I think he can be a wide receiver 2 option, maybe a 2B type of guy. I don't know that I want to put the 2021 season in his hands to continue that success he had as a rookie. I'd like to see even another 8 games of that type of production. He did disappear at times, as did John Brown when he was healthy. So I want more options than I need at wide receiver with the way Josh Allen developed, the way I know we've talked about getting the run game going. It's still going to be a pass first team. This is going to be similar to the offense we saw this year. A healthy John Brown I think you're going to have a drop off in this offense. A healthy John Brown allows that drop off to be a little bit more minimal. Even if he's not producing, him being out on the field matters to Stephon Diggs. It matters to Cole Beasley. He's a legitimate receiving option. It was a fluky year this year. I think you got to bring him back if you want a serious shot on Kenny Stills. People talk about, bringing him in. It'll be cheaper. He's not John Brown in this offense. I have no reason to think he will be. I can't think of really any vet receivers that you're going to get for cheaper that are going to do what John Brown can do for you. I'd hate to waste a draft pick on another higher end receiver at this point. So I'm marrying John Brown. I think he's too valuable to this organization. Cole Beasley gets hurt. Gabe Davis gets hurt. That receiving core gets real thin. Again, like we saw when Cole Beasley went down, like one of these guys goes down, things get thin. It's nice to be able to have that Gabe Davis to replace an injured receiver, or even a John Brown to come in and replace another injured receiver and not have a massive drop off. So I'm keeping that unit together as long as I can here for the Super Bowl window.
I think that's a really sound strategy. I think that the Bean has some leverage. There are some really high end receivers on the market. So he's not going to go out there and recoup this money. I think they can frame it that, hey, your cap number is just not feasible. We can't have you back at that number.
We'd restructure you if we can, but we can't really do that.
There's no other year in the contract. Yeah. There's no year to kick it down the road.
Right.
Turning that into, let's say, a 2-year, $10 million deal where it's like $5.5 million in the cap hit this year, and you reduce it by $4 million from 9.5 down to 5.5, and then next year is like 3.5 or 4.5. All of a sudden now it's a much more palatable number, much more realistic. You're able to keep in there, reduce that number, create some cap space. The one caveat I will say, similar to Mario Addison, is if they went down the path and they decide that, hey, we really want another weapon, but we want it at tight end, and we think for that $7.9 million we could get Gerald Everett and Deshaun Jackson, Jonnu Smith and Kenny Stills, and we think that combination for our offense opens up something with Isaiah Hodgins and Gabe Davis taking a step forward. I think that's possible. I don't think it's likely, but I think that's the only scenario. The same way that I think Mario Addison's on the roster unless they add J.J. Watt, I could see that he would be the one piece that you would swap out if they wanted to reinvest that money somewhere else on offense. I think it's possible. Otherwise, I think your scenario is much more likely.
Yeah, and I think if he had the contract Cole Beasley has, you do the same thing and get both their cap hits. I think in an ideal world, if you can get both their cap hits around 5.5 for those two guys and the way that they can produce, I think you're going to get a good deal. Maybe with Smoke, he's one of those guys like Brandon mentioned of having the ability to make up some of the money in incentives where, maybe you're not sure that he's going to be able to put together healthy seasons and full seasons after kind of a fluky year this year. So maybe it's incentive based on how often he's playing, catches, receptions, and you kind of pad those incentives into the contract, keep him motivated. But yeah, if you can get those guys to around that 5, that's your cornerback too that you're looking at. That's a cheap middle linebacker Milano replacement. If you're getting those guys around 5.5, you're able to take some of that money that you would have to spend for elite production at wide receiver, and you can fill in the depth of this team. And that's where they're going to need it the most. I think people are looking for some of the sexy signings. When I listen to you and Eric, man, a lot of the signings in free agency in the next couple of weeks, now I'm going to talk about, are going to be some of these couple $1 million a year guys that maybe match production of what we lose, trying to close that buffer type thing. And this is how you do it, in extending a John Brown, keeping that production and saving a little bit of cash.
Yep. And I want to say, I think both of us are excited about the future of Gabe Davis. I'm 100% sure if he had the defensive attention of a consistent wide receiver 2 and didn't have the luxury of many of those scores and big plays being when he was wide receiver 4 against a dime back or a safety, he wouldn't have had the production that he had. So, a lot of that was because he had the luxury of being our 4th wide receiver in many of those sets.
Exactly. This one's a hot topic. Yeah. I'm really interested to see what you want to talk about on this one, because I know you've also had, with the rumors of Mitch Morris in the season, you've gone back and forth on maybe it was something, maybe it wasn't. I don't know what to make of that stuff. I know people are taking a run with it, and that's kind of seeping its way into this offseason conversation. I think people are just kind of assuming he's gone, but tell us what other options maybe are out there and what you're going to do.
Yeah, it's probably funny. One of the biggest items Eric and I have ever disagreed on as passionately as we did is what Sean McDermott meant in that press conference where he was talking about Mitch Morris. It was oddly one of the most passionate debates he and I have had in our DMs back and forth about things.
I got stuck in a couple of those arguments and just damn it, you guys for making me read them.
Yeah, so I get it. There are dots to connect that I think intelligent people can look at that it looked a little fishy. I also think there's a case of a player with his 6th concussion with a chance to give him 27 days between his last 2 games with the bye week coming up, and that technically you removed him from the concussion protocol, so you couldn't say that you were sitting him for health reasons. You had to say that it was a coach's decision because you couldn't really phrase it any other way when you got yelled at for the Jerry Hughes stuff the year before. That I think he just kind of got caught in a press conference of misspeaking slightly and said that, they asked him, hey, are you saying he was benched? No, he wasn't benched. So which part of that are you going to believe in those press conferences? I believe that it was he wasn't benched. That's the part that I believe, and that I know several other people in the media ran with that and immediately started talking about what it would take to release him. Well, here's the real scenario. If you release Mitch Morris, you only create $4.8 million in cap space. You cannot sign a starting center for $4.8 million, let alone one of Mitch Morris's caliber. Also, if you restructure his contract, you save $3 million. So if you give me the option of I get to keep Mitch Morris and save $3 million, or release him to save $4.8 million, I'm going to keep Mitch Morris and the $3 million. The reason I say only 3, and that a couple guys in the chat here were talking about Mary, I will say that the concussion elements mean I'm not ready to already extend Mitch Morris. I want to just do these last 2 years. If he plays out these 2 years and is healthy and we want him back again, we'll deal with that at that point. But I'm confident he's going to be on this roster in 2021 and 2022. I'm comfortable kicking that can down the road a little bit to get the $3 million back right now. I'm not ready to marry and extend him because I think the concussion thing is real. But I'm going to F and restructure, give me that $3 million, use that to, sign an extra linebacker or whatever we need, and keep our center, who is our 3rd best lineman last year, and certainly would not help anything releasing him.
Yeah, and 3rd best lineman, I think he would have been our best lineman if the guards were better. I think guard play hurt him more than it hurt anyone else on that roster. I think he had to do a lot of makeup work to make those guys even look decent at times. Yeah, no, I'm on the do whatever we've got to do to keep him in the building. Yeah. Mitch Morrison, if it's the difference of $1 million, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There's not to scoff at $1 million, but I don't think that's going to be the deal breaker in any big contract they're they're trying to make. I don't think it's going to be the difference in a Super Bowl or not, and the type of player that you're going to bring in with that type of savings. So, and I'm not ready to hand over the reins to Feliciano. I know the fans love John Feliciano. I'm not even sure I want to bring Feliciano back. I think it depends on how
he was a below average center. He's an okay guard. He was a below average center. If you release Mitch Morris at $4.8 million and then are lucky enough to get Feliciano back at just $4.8 million, you just got worse at two positions, not one.
Yes. And again, bring Feliciano back if it's cool, team friendly. I'm fine with it, but he's a replaceable level player. I think that they brought him in. I thought they overpaid him at the time. I wasn't sure why they were bringing him in. He overperformed. I'm happy for it. I like the way he overperformed. I like that he fights for Josh Allen. I like that he's friends with Josh. All those things are super cool. Yeah. I think he's an average, replaceable interior offensive lineman in the NFL.
He was fun when it was $3 million.
Yes.
It's just not when you're paying it. Like the Spot Track market value for him at $8.1 million. God bless him. Go get that money, Mongo. I'm all for it. Go get your money.
Totally
that surely better not be from the Bills at $8 million a year.
Exactly. So I don't think it's that easy of a, hey, we're going to just bring Feliciano back and throw him into center as people are making it sound. I think that I agree. It's a move that you get worse at. The savings doesn't seem to really be significantly there to encourage that type of thing. And so I don't know if this is one of those moves, man. If they release him or whatever, do something with him, and Mitch Morris isn't on this team, I get accused a lot of the time of being a homer and just kind of accepted moves Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott do. I'm going to be pretty vocal in opposition of, I'm going to stand ground and die on a hill to keep Mitch Morris on this team. I think he means a lot to the team. I think you said it, third best lineman. I think he could have probably made a case for the best with what he was working with in that interior line here throughout the year. So I like that take, because when I get on Twitter, man, all I see is he's probably gone and Feliciano's the guy.
It's crazy. Madness. All right, next one. Another one that I don't think I take that back. I was going to say I don't think I've seen anyone call for him being released, but I have. I've seen people say it. Yeah, I've seen people say it. I've gotten mad about it. I try not to get triggered. What would you do with our man, Captain Jerry Hughes?
Yeah, this one's pretty tough for me, and it's kind of one I've been thinking about all day. He's, 34 years old here. I think there's a scenario with the way Jerry Hughes plays, you can convince yourself to extend him. I think there is a scenario.
He'll be 33 this season. He turns 32 this summer. He'll be 33 this season. If we were to keep him, it would be for his age 34 season.
34 season. Yeah. It's tough, man. Some of these edge guys can play till their late 30s with production. I have no reason to think that Jerry Hughes is just going to hit a wall and slow down in his ability to pressure. I'm not the guy that argues sacks matter at all, but Jerry's got to start getting home here late in his career to make it worth keeping him around. But I can see him fading into age as a guy that just comes in third downs to rush the pass. I don't think he needs to be.
Well, we saw Justin Houston in Indianapolis last year.
I think he can have
Cameron Wake did career. That for the both the Titans and the Dolphins late.
Exactly. I think he can stay put here, and maybe you extend him and kind of kick that down the road a little bit, make it a little bit more friendly. Spot Track didn't give me any, so I don't know what an extension. I don't know if you have a value on him, what extension looks like, and what he saves. But I'm happy to be a draw here with Jerry and let him play this deal out and see what happens. I don't know if he's ready to continue his career beyond this season or not. I haven't talked to the guy, so I'm happy for it to be a draw. I don't know what an extension saves or looks like. If you could help fill us in there.
Yeah, so that's the kind of one where I don't think you're adding on 2 or 3 years. I think you're adding on 1 extra year at a time. If it seems like he's healthy and ready to go and we want him back, he's a captain, he's a team leader, he's still very productive. Like you said, the pressures are there. I think he would benefit greatly from a signing like J.J. Watt. All of a sudden, he would look better with a number 1 option pushing that attention down the chain. So I looked at it. If they were to do something like, let's say they said, hey, we want you back. We think the next year is probably more at like $6 or $8 million rather than the $10 million range. But we're going to give you a little bit of that money now, spread out the money from this year. All of a sudden, you can probably figure out a way to save maybe $3 million this year, reduce his cap hit to $6.4 million this year. Next year, he would actually make closer to $6.4 million in cash, but with a cap hit of $9.4 million. I think that's the kind of thing you're talking about, where we keep Jerry, you get him back for one more year, you create $3 million as just a little extra cap space to throw around in there, but you have 2 more years of a captain and productive pass rusher that I think can still, I agree, I think can still contribute in a rotation, and I'm ready to do that year by year going forward until we see the wheels are ready to fall off.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
All right. I'm ready for my next one.
So this one, there's a lot of debate about him, but not talking about what you're going to do with him this offseason. I think a lot of debate is what's coming up and whether or not you keep him as part of the core here. What are you doing with the young, athletic freak Tremaine Edmonds, who's just got legal to drink here this last year, and we're already talking about contracts and what to do with him?
Hurry up and try to trade him while I can't. No, I'm just kidding. So obviously you're talking about 2 Pro Bowl seasons out of his 3, one of the youngest players in history to be drafted. I listed him on here because I think some people are down on it. We talked about it in our season in review defense show. I was disappointed in Tremaine Edmonds because I thought he was going to take a huge leap forward, not because he played like crap. He still played well. I do think he didn't take the step forward Josh Allen did. So where with Josh Allen, I'm ready to do the extension, the 5th-year option, and the extension, and give him all the Pagula bucks. For Tremaine Edmonds, I'm not. I'm ready to exercise the 5th-year option, which means we see him this year in 2021 and in 2022. We see how that plays out, and then we deal with that of whether he's earned what will be a sizable extension by that point. So I listed him here because I think some people are ready to move on and not even do the 5th-year option. I think that's crazy. The man has 2 Pro Bowls.
He's the exact reason you have a 5th-year option, in my opinion. He's like the prototype argument for the 5th-year option.
Yeah, so I couldn't say it any better. Like, he is the reason that you have that, so you can evaluate one more year and then figure it out. So I listed him here just because I thought it was worthwhile to check. Plenty of people here in the chat, Lone Wolf, talking about the injuries and the playing without Milano and playing without Starr. I want to see this year him healthy, him with a 1 tech in front of him, and then evaluate, is he ready to take a step forward? And then hopefully then we're talking about, whatever $60 million extensions and Luke Kuechly money. That would be great. I hope that's what we're talking about. I just listed him here because I think some people think we're ready to move on and not even do the 5th-year option, and I think that was a bit too far.
Yeah, and I've heard the argument of why you bring Milano back is to evaluate Edmonds, and my argument is if you're going to lose Milano, now is really a great time to put that 5th-year option and evaluate him, because can he play to the level that we've seen his ceiling be so far? Can he get to that level without Matt Milano? Because that's one thing on paper we have not seen him play to his ceiling without Milano next to him. If they bring somebody in that maybe isn't, one of the guys you and Eric had talked about that isn't Matt Milano today, but can kind of get close to the production, can Tremaine, rise that level of play and make him a guy that brings that group up. So that's what I'm interested to see. I think it's why you have the 5th-year option. I'm happy to exercise it. To me, that draft class of Allen and Edmonds, you really have to hit on both those guys. You used capital to get those. Those are your guys that you were building this team around. And so it's big that they give him that 5th year and then are going to be maybe hopefully happy to pay him a nice hefty extension, because he's one of the best young middle linebackers in the league after it's all said and done, hopefully.
100%. And I think there's a scenario where we see a healthy Tremaine Edmonds with, let's say, a 1-year Christian Kirksey next to him and Starlo Tuile, and let's say in the 3rd round a Tyler Shelvin, and all of a sudden they have this year and a future strategy for 1 tech with those guys there. I think we could really see what he's capable of, and that maybe then we're ready for a big Luke Kuechly type deal.
Yep.
All right. Moving on to our next one, to you, another name, again, luckily one that no one is considering moving on from or anything crazy, but 1 year left at a very reasonable deal. What are you doing with our friend and maybe Pro Bowl snub safety Micah Hyde? I'm
trying to get married to Micah Hyde here. we talk about it a lot as Bills fans about what this safety tandem means. I think even as much as we talk about it and we've talked about it on this show, I think it's almost understated at times what this safety tandem means to the Bills. I think part of the problem that they don't get the recognition they deserve is because they are such a tandem. I think if you look around the league and you see good players that play together at safety, but I don't know that you see a tandem that plays in unison and can be interchangeable in the way Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer are. They allow Sean McDermott to do so many things, and I don't think it's as easy as, hey, we got to find a replacement for Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer here coming up in the future. I think Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier need to ride out these two as a key piece. Hyde and Poyer to the wheels fall off. Absolutely. I think guys can play to a pretty late age.
Safety ages gracefully.
Yes, and I think that
especially for smart ones.
Yeah, I think Micah Hyde is a good athlete and a smart safety. I think he can play for a long time in this league still. So I'm trying to marry him. I don't have Spot Track, unfortunately, didn't hand deliver me the numbers of what an extension looks like, and I'm not a guy that's you and goes through the money. So if you can give us kind of an idea, because you're not saving a ton this year. His deal's super reasonable, so it's not something that you're going to do because it's going to be some huge savings here this season is going to give you much cap space, but you're doing it because you need Micah Hyde till the wheels fall off, like Taylor said here.
Yeah, and so they're in a weird spot where, again, he's such a value. His cap hit's only $6.7 million. His base salary is only $4 million. There's not a lot you can do there to reduce this year's cap hit. You know, if you give him a 2-year extension after this at whatever the market rate is there, let's say you give him a little boost, maybe it's more like $7 million or $8 million. He is over 30. He's not going to get a $10+ million deal, but you could give him some respect in that area. You probably could reduce his cap hit this year from 6.7 down to say 5, and like you said, 1.7 million of extra spending space, where you're also reassuring of 2 more years of Micah Hyde. That's all good stuff. You're not creating a ton of cap space here because he deserves
it adds up, though. You
raise.
were taking 1 point here, 1 point there.
Yeah. You'll see what it adds up to here in a moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right on the right path, and I think a 2-year deal, you had the going rate $7-8 million, but you reduce this year by a little bit and knock it from 6.7 down to $5 million. I think you're in a really good spot, and you know Micah Hyde's a good looking man. He's the kind of man you want to marry.
Handsome guy.
All right, I'm ready.
All right, let's talk about it. Where am I? One of your favorite players to start the year, super high. I would call it Stan, maybe. You're standing for him. Yeah. But it looks like we might be stuck with this guy. So what are we going to do with his contract? AJ Klein, he's staying this year. There's no scenario where he's going. So what are they going to do with his deal? You going to marry him, kill him, or F him? So
even more so than some of the other guys we talked about, when AJ Klein signed his 3-year deal last year, it was for sure a $2 million deal. It's not quite as bad as Stars, but you're talking about a $4 million dead cap hit to save $6.4 million. Releasing AJ Klein only creates $2.4 million in savings. You know, with the special teams, and obviously he started really poorly. Then you saw him come on as the year went, that he can contribute on a football team. You know, I want him here. You can restructure him and shuffle the money around and do an F or even a pay cut. You know, if they can negotiate a pay cut, I would be excited and I would be towards that. If it's just a straight restructure, next year he has a $400,000 dead cap hit and $5.6 million in cap hit, meaning if you release him, it's 5.2 of that 5.6 million is savings. I don't want to mess with that. I want to keep that option available if we need it to move on from him. If Tyrell Dodson takes a step forward, or we draft someone, or we sign Christian Kirksey to a 2-year deal, or whatever it is, I'm not sure I just want to straight up restructure. I do think they can negotiate a pay cut with him, maybe even a Tyler Kroft style pay cut, where it's, hey, we're just going to give you we're going to guarantee a chunk of this year's money at $4 million guaranteed, with some incentives to get your $6.4 million back. You give us a $2.4 million relief in this, you can earn the money back with playing time incentives that we'll have to pay for next year, and we're going to void next year's contract so you can just be a free agent and go after and get a little bit more money rather than waiting and likely being released but not knowing about it until later. I think that's the kind of thing that you have here. So I'm going to say F in the sense of a pay cut where we get maybe $2.4 million of that money back.
Love it, because I think a lot of people, and we're even seeing it somewhere here in the chat, somebody saying basically if you're going to lose Milano, he can play linebacker. I'm not happy with that. Honestly, I'm not going to say that that's the plan I want to go into 2021 with. If they lose Milano, like you said, I want to get a Kirksey or a Campbell. And that money that you're taking the pay cut can go towards that other linebacker, and Klein can be a guy that's more of a special teams and come
or
in.
Say a cheap guy like Nicholas Morrow that we talked about from the Raiders.
Yes.
A platoon of Morrow and Klein on rundowns and Morrow in the coverage. Now all of a sudden you can cobble that together.
Yes, and to take a pay cut and allow you to have that I feel more comfortable cobbling something like that together, or going with a Kirksey and having Klein back him up on a pay cut and be a special teams contributor. Like, those things make me happy, and I can feel like I can live without Milano. I'd prefer to keep Milano, but those are the scenarios I can live without Milano. Going into the season with just Klein doesn't make me feel all good. I don't think he's going to play at the ceiling of the Seattle game with any type of consistency.
That would be lovely, but
yeah.
So Lone Wolf asks a good question here. Why would he take a pay cut? Most of these scenarios are basically a game of chicken, where they're going to say, so obviously it's painful to cut AJ Klein, but it is a positive cap savings of $2.4 million. And they can say to their agent, hey, if we release him, is there any possibility you're getting that $6.4 million back? No. It's a 0% scenario you do that. We don't even think you're going to get $4 million on the open market. We're willing to drop it down to $4 million as a compromise, that we don't have to eat the $6.4 million or eat the $4 million for a dead cap hit, but we'll give that to you as a fully guaranteed deal right now in the spring. We will guarantee your roster spot with $4 million guaranteed, but you give back that other $2.4 million. We think that's still better than you're going to get on the open market. Yeah. If you want to dare us, we'll release you and you can go do your best in this nuclear winter as a 29-year-old linebacker, with coverage issues. That's why he would take a pay cut.
Yes, and who he is easily we can replace an AJ Klein in free agency, and it won't be a huge drop off from Matt Milano to that player. Just
probably not for less than the $2.4 million. That's why I don't want to release him. I don't think you could replace him at $2.4 million. I think that would be a challenge. I think he contributes special teams, veteran leadership in the locker room, and he had his moments. He had the Seattle game. He has big games here and there, but I want him cheaper.
Sure.
All right, you ready for your last one?
Yeah, give it to me.
The Snowman, Dion Dawkins. Are you going to release him?
I'm just going to F him, I think. I think this one's similar to Trey White. I think it's an easy one. I know he's going to be here. He's going to be here as long as we can keep him here, and hopefully he retires a Buffalo Bill. I think that he's happy to restructure and give the team a little bit of savings. I had it through Spot Track that you could say 4.7 just about million with a restructure from him. So not nothing, where we're adding it up here at the end. I think that's one of the bigger hits on my side that I had of this argument. So I think easy to do to F Dion Dawkins, and you're keeping him. He's not going anywhere. The Snowman's got to be here if we want to keep Josh upright.
Well, it may be the easiest one out of all of them from a restructure standpoint, because you're talking about that 4.7? 4.7. You divide that into the 4 years, it's $1.56 million each year. So you're talking about next year, his cap hit was 12.7. Well, now all of a sudden you're going to make it 14.2. Like, it's not like some huge difference. 12.7 to 14.2 just are not that big of a difference. The following year, it's 13.4. Well, instead of 13.4, you make it 14.7.
Yeah.
Instead of 13.8.
Franchise left tackles?
More than 14.7 million. So that's the easiest one. He's going to be here all 4 of those years of the new extension. We want to keep him there, spreading that money around and getting a little bonus this year by cutting him a big check, for that money right up front. That's an easy way to do it, and an easy $4.7 million. I think that's one of the easier ones to do.
Yeah. Perfect timing here. Richard Greenwood, Matakevich. Let's go over to him. Okay. The stands are out. They want to hear about their guy. What are we doing with?
He is the final one on our list here.
Save the best for last, man.
So he's one that weirdly I'm going to marry. Medikevich. So I think he's one that you can have a similar conversation as AJ Klein. There's no way in this weird situation when you talk about Brandon Beane in his postseason presser saying if we had known it was going to be like this, we would have done things differently. The luxury of signing a special teams monster. He had a great season at special teams, but a special teams player for a 2-year, $7.1 million deal probably would be one of the things you'd take back. And if you talk to his agent and say, hey, if we release you, are you really thinking you're going to get $3.7 million on the open market? Because the answer is no, you're not going to get that. I think if you tack on 2 more years, probably close to the minimum, but taking this year's 3.7 and spreading it out with those 2 other years. And now all of a sudden you're talking about a 3-year, $5.7 million deal where now it's a little bit more reasonable. You're talking about, each year being 1.8, 1.9 million. I'm okay paying a top end special teams player $1.8 million and a little bit more than the minimum, but not the $3.7 million. So that's my plan, is extend him 2 years at a pretty cheap deal, spreading out some of this year's hit as a signing bonus over the 3 years, where this year he's still going to walk away with still close to the $3 million in cash that he would have got, but we keep him for the 2 other years. He has some security. We get back about $2 million for cap space this year, and we keep a top-end special teams contributor for 3 years at a pretty reasonable rate.
Yeah.
So oddly, I'm going to marry Tyler Medikevich.
I'm into it. Also, a lot of these guys too, I think a lot of people say, well, why will a guy say take a pay cut like Klein or something like that? The Bills are now at the point where they're a desirable team to latch onto for guys kind of late in their career, guys that are, middle tier to below free agents that are going to go out on the market. One, like you said, maybe not make the amount of money that they would make if they do kind of some type of extension. And 2, if they do make that money or make up for that money, they're going to go to a team that's not in the position to go win a Super Bowl like the Bills are most likely. There's only going to be, when the start of the season, there's going to be 4 to 6 teams that everyone's going to be considering Super Bowl contenders. The Bills are in that top part of the NFL. So if you're a guy looking at the landscape, do you want to go to a team like the Jets where you're not really sure if they're even going to make the playoffs in the 3 years? I know some guys just want to make their money at the end of their career, but the money might not be a huge difference in going to suffer through playing with the Jets for 3 years or going on a fun run like the Bills are about to have for 3 years. And some of these guys have been part of it now for a couple of years. And this is where the culture matters. This is where all those things that Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have laid down the foundation where, hey, yeah, I will take a pay cut because you've built something special here. I want to be a part of it. It's not a huge difference. You're right. I might not make it much on the free agent market anyway. I could win a Super Bowl here and have a ring and be a legend and all these things and still make a good living. So I think the kind of why would a guy take a pay cut? That's the process, baby. That's why it's been built the way it is. So that you can go ask these special teams aides to say, hey, we need a little money, take a pay cut, we'll keep you around. Well, let's go win a Super Bowl.
So, Aaron, we have now conducted 16 different transactions. For anyone listening, we only released 2 players. Yes. We only released 2 players. We only released Vernon Butler and Lee Smith. We did not release any other players. We did not create any other holes. How much cap space do you think we created over those 16 moves?
30 something million, 35 million.
We just created $53.4 million in cap space.
Can we trade for Khalil Mack now?
We can, in fact, trade for Khalil Mack. So let me explain a little bit of that. So the fact that we didn't release anyone or only 2 players is that if we did all those moves, all 16 of the moves, that $53 million isn't free. That comes from the future. We would now highly leverage the situation in 2022 and 2023 and 2024. And even with the extension for Stephon Diggs in 2025 and 2026, that we would be adding multiple years into the future. For Lone Wolf asking dead cap, it actually wasn't that much in future dead cap that we created
because you're keeping them all.
Because we're keeping players. we only released Vernon Butler, so in dead cap we only created
but that dead cap
1.5.
2024.
We now made it that we could not release virtually any of those guys next year, and that we would be married to some 30-plus year players. So what I will say is, each of those, Aaron and I are reasonably smart people. Brandon Bean and Joe Shane, those guys are way smarter than we are. They know all these options and plenty that we don't even think about or know about.
10 years into the future.
Yes, with the likely to be earned bonuses and not likely to be earned bonuses and option bonuses that trigger in the future. They know all kinds of different things that we're not even familiar with. Each of those 16 moves are a card that he can play. I don't think that we see very many of them, maybe 4 of them, before the league year starts. We don't have to do that much to get under the salary cap. I think Vernon Butler is going to happen. If they just release Vernon Butler, we're under the salary cap and don't have to do anything else. We're good right then. I don't think we see a ton of these unless you need them. So as they negotiate some of these other contracts, all of a sudden you say, hey, we ended up getting Christian Kirksey for cheaper than what we expected. We think we can make that work. It actually gave us enough room that, hey, I know we missed out on J.J. Watt, but we think we could get Carl Lawson. And it was a little bit better than what we thought to get Carl Lawson. Now we're going to need to cut Mario Addison. And now we can get Carl Lawson for $8 million. We're going to need that $6.4 million from Mario Addison to use as a coupon towards Carl Lawson. Those things will happen one for one as they need them. They don't want to do all of these. Ideally, they don't need to do 10 or 12 of them, and that they only need to do 4 or 6 of them, and that we keep that flexibility for future years. But they can go to do these things. As I know a show I think we both watched, there's always money in the banana stand. Yes. They can go to that when they need it. This isn't Madden. You don't go out there and preemptively do all 16 moves and say, hey guys, we got $53 million in cap space. Let's go spend it and figure out how to use it. You only use this as you need it and as opportunities present themselves. I do think a handful of moves to get it closer to 20 million is pretty likely in play. I think that's the ballpark that they'll likely get to make a handful of moves to re-sign a player or two, to sign a player or two. It's not going to be this crazy spending spree we've had the last couple of years or a trade for Stephon Diggs, but they're going to make some moves. I think we see 4 or 5 of the ones we talked about here tonight, and they create themselves 20 million and then move forward and are in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think they're happy to go pretty close up against the cap where if they can bring some of these guys back in 2021. I think this was a surprise league-wide. They are not the only GMs dealing with a different projected cap that they were going to deal with. But I think things will get back to normal going forward, and they'll be able to continue on with the plan. So I think in a perfect scenario, you're right. They only make a handful of the moves, are happy to get up close to the cap with a team that was in the AFC Championship game a year ago, not shifting too many of those pieces away from the team and trying to add through the draft and get some value guys like Kirksey, you mentioned if they lose Milano, if they lose a value piece, without shifting too much around, and are happy to kind of be backed up a little bit into the cap this year, knowing that they are still in that Super Bowl window competing for a Super Bowl. The teams that are going to be closest up against the cap are going to be the teams fighting for the Lombardi at the end of the year. You're going to see Green Bay Packers are going to be right there. You're going to see Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be right up there. These good teams that are built to win right now are going to be close to the cap here in 2021. It's going to be interesting to see how some of these GMs up at the top of the league with the competitors, how many pieces they're going to be able to keep from their last run and kind of keep it together in this low cap year. And I think for the cap nerds like you, it must be fascinating to see what type of gymnastics some of these GMs are going to be able to play. Because I think as fans, we see all these moves that are probably going to happen. We get all hyped and read every clickbait article on every big major move, and all these guys are going to have. I don't think there's going to be a lot of craziness. I think GMs are pretty good at moving some money around and keeping things within their plans, and we're not going to, it's like the NBA trade deadline. We hear about how every team's going to change dramatically. And I think when it's all said and done, a lot of these guys are going to stay on their teams. A lot of guys are just going to do kind of, like you said, 1-for-1's extension. If we can get a guy, fine, we'll use this card. If not, we're going to keep you at the deal you're at because we're under the cap and we don't need to go crazy for nothing.
Yeah. Real quick, I'm going to answer something that gets asked a lot at this time of the year. A couple people, I think Lone Wolf was asking, how much money do you need to sign draft picks? And a couple of people were answering with the normal answer that you see, which is like $6, $8, $10 million, depending on how high
likes a little buffer,
the picks are. A real good thing to remember is the draft picks. The Bills this year have 7 picks, picking from the 30th slot. It's $5.3 million in the total picks that they would have to pay. However, every pick from the 4th round on makes less than the veteran minimum guy that they're bumping off the calculation. So right now, we already have 51 guys there. When you sign a 5th round pick for $730,000 and you bump off a veteran for $825,000, you technically save $100,000. Yeah. The only ones that make any impact is the 1st round pick this year will have a cap hit of $1.5 million, which means you add about $800,000. The 2nd round pick is $885,000. You add about $100,000. All told, our draft class needs to take up a little over $1 million in total net cap difference. It's less than $2 million. It is not a factor. People add that in there like
starting offensive tackle.
Oh,
and you're only paying perfect
1.5. Yeah, 1.5 million this year is our 30th pick overall. Right. So when people bring that up, they're like, "Oh, we need to carve out $5 million in cap space for the draft slot." We don't. We don't have to do that. We need about $1 million for our draft class. That's it.
Being like, I forget what the number is. You probably know exactly.
It used to be 10. He used to like to have 10 million during the season.
I could see him moving that to 8 or something, and there's going 6, 7. Like I could see him still wanting to get that buffer to have to play with going into the year.
Yeah, he will want money to do moves during the season. He may not have the luxury he normally does, but he will still want money to be available.
Yeah.
All right, man, we've gone longer than normal. We're at 1 hour and 20 minutes. This has been a lot to be able to cover. I hope you guys enjoyed this. These are a lot of guys that you're going to hear talked about over the next couple weeks here. Really excited to be able to kind of talk through all these different options as they happen. Make sure you're checking out all the other shows, the guys at the Hoof and Disguise Coverage and the Film Breakdowns with Eric. He's got an awesome one coming up Sunday. A lot of you guys are aware of University of Buffalo star running back Jarrett Patterson. He's going to be jumping on to do a film breakdown of his last year, the crazy record-setting year he had in the MAC with Eric on Sunday night at 7 o'clock. Make sure you guys are jumping on to check that out. All kinds of great stuff to do. Aaron, where can the good people find you?
You can find me over at Aaron Quinn 716. I've been a little bit quiet here this off season. It's starting to pick up for me. This exercise was helpful. You giving me some homework to go through was helpful. Really getting me into the off season. It's a long off season. I think everybody rushes into it. And this year it's just like, well, I don't think a lot of crazy things are going to happen. So doing this exercise was fun to kind of pull back some of that crazy excitement and say, hey, all right, now let's really look at this roster and do a deep dive here with these next couple of weeks leading up to free agency. We've timed it pretty well. It's almost like we scheduled these things out in advance to how it would line up. So a couple weeks here to talk about free agency. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And this is the kind of year that, now the Bills are in. People talk about this, that, we have to make these big moves to go all in. The Bills are all in. The Bills are all in. Next year they have Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and Trey White and awesome players coming back no matter what. We're going to have a couple new names. You guys are going to be just fine. No move that we make will be the reason that we are or are not a top 5 team going for the Super Bowl, because we're already a top 5 team going for the Super Bowl, because that's the kind of team that we have now. It's fantastic and something everybody should be excited about, to be able to, dive into everything we have coming. So we'll be there for you into free agency, into the draft, everything going on, all for your off season. We're going to be your one-stop shop for everything you need with the Buffalo Bills. All right, guys, this has been a lot of fun. Appreciate you. For Aaron Quinn and Greg Tompsett, you have been listening to Cover One Buffalo.